Hello, everyone. Peldi here, substitute hosting for Steve again. Today, I'm joined by Trine Falbe, UX strategist, designer, author, and speaker. Welcome, Trine.
Thank you very much.
We're so excited to have you here. As a little intro, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I work a lot with UX and innovation, and I've written a few books on UX and ethical design. And I currently work mostly with developing different innovative ideas in the educational space, but I also run my own consultancy and do, digital product development with a focus on good, responsible product development.
That's excellent. How did you get into this specific niche? What
So
made
into
you want to
the
go into the ethical part of design?
hmm, I think this has been something that has obviously matured over time. What's happened is that uh, some years ago I started working in the space of design for children. I've actually been I was employed in a startup for a number of years that designed experiences for children with the focus of building their creative mindset. And it actually really kicked off at that point because and also before that I've always had the feeling that, as UX designers, as people who work in the digital industry, with the increase in digital products that people use, we have a big responsibility to do better than what's currently out there. And also just, things over the past years, things have gone from bad to worse. So between writing the first book, White Hat UX, and the second book, Ethical Design Handbook, things kind of changed for the worse. So I think there's a big need for people in the digital space to speak up and go against the sort of the mainstream media that's out there, like Facebook and the huge corporations, Google, etc., that seem to think it's okay to treat people as data points and products being sold.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% with you on that. I've been a programmer my whole career, and I remember back in 2010, the term gamification started becoming very, very popular. And that was the first time in my career where I thought, I don't like this at all. Like
Mm.
this is not good. Before, everything that had to do with software was fantastic in my mind, and when this happened, I'm like, are we sure we need to do this? This seems kind of evil to me. um is that when it started? Is that I remember, I think at Stanford started teaching a class on behavioral psychology applied to software, and that's when
Mm.
it all started. The algorithm was born,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
true. And so I have a pretty specific viewpoint on behavioral psychology used in software design, because I think as with a lot of other types of knowledge, I mean, behavioral psychology is a type of knowledge that we can apply to our work, right? But we can apply it in two ways. We can choose to apply it to do good, or we can choose to apply it to do evil. And I don't really mean that people necessarily do it intentionally to be evil at all, because people are not inherently evil. But we can use our knowledge to, you know different types of things, to achieve different types of things. And sadly, in software, a lot of companies decided and chose to use the knowledge from behavioral psychology to their own benefit, instead of the benefit for the people who actually use the software. And I think that's actually the underlying problem. It's not the knowledge itself, it's the way the knowledge is used.
Yeah, yeah. It was amazing to me. It was also the first time I got exposed to behavioral psychology, and basically, what it is, it's understanding, well, that's my interpretation, but understanding that uh, uh, Homo erectus, the human beings are very hackable. They're not perfect. We have all our biases, and these biases, and we have all our flaws and blind spots, and we're kind of predictable. We can be manipulated, just like you can train a dog, right? If you know how, you can get people to do what you want, and they don't even realize they're doing it, right? So,
Mm.
what are some of these? I think these are called dark patterns when you intentionally try to do that kind of stuff. What are some examples of these dark patterns?
So there are tons of dark patterns out there, like roadblocks, for instance. We see that I'm seeing an increase in roadblocks. So a roadblock is when you are forced to, unless you do a certain thing, you can't kind of move forward. Hence the sort of the roadblock. And I see an increase in roadblocks on platforms that have, or websites that can't comply with GDPR rules. So you kind of get a roadblock unless you comply to certain things. The same with cookie consents. I'm actually seeing an increase in roadblocks where unless you consent to tracking cookies, for instance, you can't use the website. So this is one type of dark pattern, but there are also dark patterns like sneaking products into your shopping basket, which is just I honestly I don't get why any company would want to do that, because the backlash you get from doing that is pretty intense. I've seen some pretty intense backlash on companies that do that, and they're kind of trying to brush it off with a joke, but it I mean I don't get why you would want to do it. The thing is, these dark patterns that a lot of companies use, they use them, I think, for a couple of reasons. One is they seem to work. Um, the second thing is they do it because so many other companies do it. So it's become the norm to do so. And I think and that's also why I think it's so interesting to work with responsible product design and ethical design, is that it's I think it's a lot more ambitious to do so. I think it's super unambitious, and I mean that in the fiercest way. It's a sign of unambitious strategy to just do what everyone else does because it works. It's lazy design
Yeah.
when a company applies intentionally applies a dark pattern to get their way with their customers. It's unambitious and it's lazy.
Absolutely lazy, because it's you probably don't your business is probably very different than the business of the people that are doing it, that you're copying it from. If Facebook does it, um Facebook is a unique beast with billions of users, right? If you copy what they do in your B2B SaaS, it's probably not gonna fly the same way.
Yeah.
um
I, I
Another.
like I like the term beast. I
Yeah. Another dark pattern that I heard about is the red dot, where the notification that tells you have something important, but they don't show it right away. They wait between half a second and a second to show it to you, so that you will notice it more, because the
Mm,
human eye notices moving things more.
yeah.
Like, who comes up with that? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It is ridiculous, and you and I certainly can agree on that. The thing is that notification frameworks are designed to make us excessively use products, right? Digital
Addicted.
products. Yes.
Yeah.
And there is a certain sense of addiction connected to the way that notifications work. And I also think that is really something. Do we want that in our products? Is that an ambitious approach to making products and things that people that we want people to love and use. Is that really the ambition we want to set?
Well, I guess it's the
um yeah,
incentives, right? If your
yeah,
business model is advertising based, and so it's all about the attention economy, and your valuation is tied to eyeballs more than revenue, I guess that makes sense to you. But for listeners of this podcast, I feel like that's absolutely not the case. So, but I do see some even small bootstrappers, they do some dark patterns or less than perfectly ethical behavior. What are some of the things that you've noticed that kind of make you cringe?
yeah. So I agree. I think the things that really make me cringe is when these small bootstrappers mindlessly copy what the huge beasts, so to speak, do, because it makes very little sense in the context of a small bootstrap startup. I think it's problematic that when they, for instance, use pixel tracking and stuff like that, because why would they want to? Honestly, when involved in development of software, what you want is you want to talk to the people who use it or who are intended to use it. I'm currently in the process of conducting a series of interviews with some people who, for a prototype that I'm working on myself, and honestly, the feedback that I get through 10 interviews times 45 minutes is, you know, far outweighs the value of any type of data that I could ever get. But I think what really makes me wonder when I look at the approach that a lot of bootstrappers probably have is they rely on data only. And I think that's a big mistake that they forget. I talk a lot about triangulation. Without it, I don't want this to become sort of an academic talk, but triangle or scientific talk, but or perspective. But triangulation of any insight is crucial. So you can't just look at something from one point of view. You can't just look at a hypothesis from data or from interviews. You kind of have to look at it from three different angles to make sure that you're accurate, because if you don't do that, you're bound to make huge mistakes. And I
Yeah,
think that really makes me wonder what they're doing. But they're just copying what the mastodons are doing. But the thing is, they're not mastodons, so they need to do something different, right?
right. If you're not at a certain size, the data that you get is not really statistically valid anyways.
Yeah, valid. Yeah,
So
exactly.
what are you doing? I mean, might as well not track anything. Well, luckily, our previous episode was all about how to conduct a user interview. So hopefully, that will be useful to people. All right.
Absolutely.
So
I would definitely go back and listen to that episode then if I hadn't had the chance to do that.
yeah, yeah. So all right. So what's the alternative? I mean, how does a bootstrapper do more responsible or ethical product design? Actually, before we get to that, you used to use the word ethical, and now you've shifted to responsible. Why is that?
So it's not that I don't don't use ethical design as a term, because obviously the book that we wrote it's the title of the book, so obviously it still kind of lives and has a place. But I think I've come to realize over having many conversations with people is that when we talk about ethics versus responsibility, ethics is almost like a standard that no one thinks that they can ever meet. Whereas responsible, I mean, we can do responsible. We can do that. We can achieve responsible more easily than we can
Got it.
achieve ethical, because also because ethics and philosophy is very closely tied
Mm,
together. And you know, I don't know about you, but I tend to be a little bit scared of philosophical
right. Yeah,
discussions.
for
To be
sure.
honest, I mean they scare me because uh, it's just so abstract and not really necessarily tied to the real world.
Got it. Got it.
So I think talking about responsible design makes it more actionable.
Yeah, I get it. Less intimidating for sure.
Less intimidating,
Yeah.
yes.
All right. So how can we build responsible products responsibly?
Okay, so we obviously there are a lot of elements tied to responsible software and responsible product design. And again, I live in the digital sphere, so my context is digital, right? Just to make sure that everyone is clear on that. Um, what is important to do is to first look at, okay, what's the current situation, what are we currently doing. And I think that a really good way to do that is to use something like a scorecard. In the ethical design handbook, we actually created a scorecard consisting of 8 different cards, and it's basically a way to measure the state of affairs. So we created scorecards for instance, the data model. What does the data model of a piece of software look like, or a product? What does the UX look like? What does the communication look like? What does the data handling look like? What is the so having all these different themes, so that you are sure that you look at your product from a holistic perspective. And what you then do is each scorecard consists of a set of statements that you can, for instance, say, are we sure that, or on a scale of, or when you evaluate the statement of, we make sure that the user knows what data we are collecting and why. Evaluate that statement. Is that like a 0, or is it a 3? And once you've gone through a set of statements that help you assess what your data handling looks like, you can be pretty sure that you get a pretty good understanding of whether you have some work to do, or whether you actually have a pretty good state of things there. So I think it's important to look at your current situation in the product and figure out, okay, where are we not meeting the mark that we want, and then focus on fixing that one thing at a time. I think it's hard to I think it's important to look at incremental change and incremental improvement more than looking at, if we don't fix everything 100%, we are failing.
Right.
Because if we hold ourselves to that standard, we will fail.
Right.
It's okay to want to improve things over time, and and that's a responsible way of developing.
Right. So these questions you said are in the responsible design handbook that you wrote.
Yep.
Are they also available? Is there a snippet or a preview somewhere?
There is, or there was. I'm not actually, I looked for it the other day and I couldn't really find it, but we had a download on Smashing Magazine. We sell the book through Smashing Magazine's website. Okay. So I just want to make sure that it's still there. Otherwise, I'll definitely get in touch with them, because we actually had an Excel spreadsheet for download that people could just basically perfect. Download and edit and use for their own purpose. I think it's a super tangible way to get started.
Yeah. So we'll make sure to find it and put it in the show notes below.
Yes.
That's great. Question about these questions that that you wrote. How did you come up with them? Because I feel like that's an important task to, because you're defining what's responsible and what's not. Going back to philosophy, really.
Yep. And you're right. It's we kind of we decided that we wanted to focus on these specific questions or statements, because we think that looking at themes like data collection and data storage, processing, UX, governance, for instance. Governance is also hugely important when you look at how you develop good products. So we actually developed this scorecard over a fair amount of time while writing the book. And it's a combination of the experience that all of us, we are three people who wrote the book together, the experience that we have building products. So it's a very sort of tangible, unphilosophical approach. For instance, when we talk about governance, one of the questions is that there is a person responsible for ethical governance in the team. Yes or no, right? Is that something we have? The governance model includes a procedure for handling user feedback. Do we even do that systematically? So these questions or statements are designed to make us to challenge the status quo and figure out where we fall short, both on a holistic scale, but you can also go into each question and choose focal points or KPIs to actually measure your improvements over time. And I think that's also something that we don't talk enough about in design is tracking improvements or measuring. And when we don't talk about measurements, the business the business isn't very interested in us. So we have to also start talking a lot more business in software design. And yeah, I think that's kind of the key to breaking through to the people who we actually need, who needs to listen to this, the business, the businesses, or the business layer of companies, right?
Very interesting. Have you gotten any pushback on those questions from, I don't know, the advertising industry?
So I don't think advertising per se is bad. I mean, I used to work in advertising, but it was back in the day when advertising, when profiling consisted of, profiling was less detailed. Profiling consisted of primarily sort of demographic criteria and some geographic criteria and maybe some political, views and stuff like that. Whereas now, they probably know what you ate for breakfast based on your profile. And I think, so obviously, how can I put it? Ethical design and responsible design is not for everyone. And that's okay. We never intended the book to change, the philosophy of Facebook, because we don't think we can. And I don't think that that's realistic. I don't think it's realistic. But my hope is that saying to small startups and bootstrappers that, okay, if you want to be ambitious, if you actually don't just want to follow the blind mainstream state of things, and if you want to become a little bit more ambitious, why not challenge the status quo? Why not challenge the way that things are? Because to be honest, I'm seeing an increase in customer awareness. I mean, we can discuss GDPR, but GDPR has really surfaced has surfaced some problems and made generally people, much more aware of their privacy and their rights to digital privacy. And this is a mega trend and a wave that's not stopping. Yeah. So I would rather be in front of that wave than under it.
Absolutely. So I absolutely agree, and I see it inside our company as well. We've always tried to do the right thing, but now we have much more of a shared language to discuss these things. And also as consumers, when we get a phone call, a spam phone call, we know what to say. We know that it's not correct. It's not just the way things should be. So I definitely see things improving, especially in Europe, I would say. I feel like in the US, it's, the concept of privacy is less of an important for average people, not to mention China, where it's completely unheard of, that with all the
or
facial...
India.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. It's, I agree. I think we're kind of blindfolded in Europe. in a way, in a in a good and also in a bad way, because we mistakenly think that the standards here apply everywhere, but they don't. I've had some really interesting discussions with someone in my network who she's from India, and she now moved to the US, but she used to work out of India, and she kept saying, Trina, this is fantastic, but what do you do in a country that has no legislation on this?
Right.
Because I think ethical design and responsible design is well helped by legislation. And I think certain problems we can solve from, bottom up inside the companies, from, you saying, and I totally agree, you've always tried to do the right thing. And that's kind of your strategy and your norm. But and that's great. But some things, and especially the companies who don't have that philosophy, they need help or nudging from legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the legislative layer in place, it's very, very hard to navigate, and it's very hard to convince a business that they should do better than what the legislation forces them to, if they're not, if it doesn't connect with their values or philosophy.
Right. So now that there is more of an awareness in consumers as well, is the fact that we are building a responsible company a competitive advantage, or is it already sort of the baseline where people start just expecting everybody to do that? And if it is a competitive advantage, how do we market that? How do we share, hey, choose us because we are good people, instead of our competition who will track everything about you?
Yeah. I think it is a competitive advantage still, because I still think, sadly, a lot of companies that that are formed are based on a value set or philosophy that's not really very responsible, sadly. So I still see this as definitely as a competitive advantage. Whether we should flaunt it in our branding, we could. That attracts the type of customers who align with those values. So if that's your strategy, if you want to attract customers that align with your values, then yes, absolutely. If you don't necessarily want that, if you just want a broad customer base, I mean, why not just do it? I guess what I'm a little bit opposed to is kind of using it as a flagship, because I don't necessarily think that should be the reason why we do it.
Yeah, that's ironic, right? You're
it's a little bit ironic, I know.
Absolutely, yeah, that shouldn't be your motivation. But if you do it, I feel like again,
why not talk about it if you do it anyway, right?
Or back to legislation, right? There are bio products, organic products, and they got together and they got a label, a certification of some sort, where they said, we are this kind of product. We have the sticker, right? I feel like maybe something like that could be useful for companies as well.
It could. The problem with certifications is they need upholding, right? They need, once you have the certification, what if you do something that violates the certification in 6 months or 3 months? Right. Then what? And who gets to who should do the who checks that?
Yeah.
So I think certifications in theory work, in practice, in the practical world, they don't work efficiently enough. I wanted to say something about how you use the fact that you have a responsible product. I think where it shows, it can show, it would be natural to show it inside the product. So using it in your microcopy, for instance, sharing and surfacing, we don't, for instance, in your cookie settings or in your privacy settings or in your terms of service, sharing and just surfacing how you do things in a very clear way is a way to surface your responsibility. So I don't think that you necessarily have to use it as a proactive branding strategy, but it would be stupid not to surface it in the product, in the micro copy, in your wording, in your terms, in your
Yeah, you can
and it's also
remind
impossible
people.
not to, really.
You can remind people, yes, you're about to send us this information, but
Yeah.
here's a link on how we're going to treat it. And it's amazing
Yeah,
to
or
me.
we don't share your data. Just
Yeah,
surface that instead of hiding it in your settings. We don't
right,
share your data with any third parties
right.
ever.
Yeah.
Pinky swear, right? I mean,
Right.
why not surface it if you don't do it?
Yeah. It's amazing to me the amount of care and effort that we put into our terms of service and privacy policy. We're constantly tweaking it and making it better. And I know that maybe 1% of our customers actually reads it. That
Mm-hmm.
it's so asymmetrical, the amount of
Yeah,
effort we put into it.
I know. And the thing is, what? I would challenge any company to write a terms of service that was less than 2 pages. I mean, if you can't state it clearly, why state it at all?
Right.
That would be a proper challenge and a proper ambitious level for me to say, okay, we only have 2 pages. What do we put into them?
Right. Yeah,
And
interesting.
that would make people actually read them
Yeah, but
to a much greater extent.
no, that's interesting. I guess I would agree with that. For you could express the philosophy in 2 sentences, not 2 pages, but the detail about we like to give people exact details about, if you write our support email address, this is the third party that we use to do that. If instead you write us through our website, this is the third party that processes that information, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want to be super transparent, but maybe that can be an addendum to the privacy policy for those who really want to. Maybe it
Yeah.
could be structured as 2 tiers.
Typeform actually uses that. That's really interesting. I love their terms of service. They have a humanly readable terms of
Hmm.
service, and then they have the legal terms of service, or the legalese terms of service. And there is a huge difference between them. I think that's a big inspiration for that could be a big inspiration for you and
Yeah, I'll take a
other.
look for sure.
Yeah, it's
Excellent.
they do that really well.
Well, one moment to brag is I know that our terms of service have been copied and pasted several times for several other startups. So I feel good about that. That
That's the
means
biggest
that
compliment you can get,
I
right?
know we're doing something right.
Yeah.
In fact, at the bottom of the terms of service, we say, now that we've noticed it, we say, hey, if you have a startup and want to copy paste this, go ahead. Just make sure you have it checked by a lawyer.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. I think that's definitely something to put on the trophy shelf, that you've managed to get there, that people
Yeah.
copy it.
I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're almost out of time, but I'd like to finish with a practical question, which is this. We have Google Analytics on our website. We've had it since the beginning. You know why? Because everybody else was doing it. But we never look at it. It's so rare that we look at it. We only look at it for specific things like figuring out how many Macs and how many Windows, or what version
Mm.
of Chrome people use, blah, blah, blah. So I'd like to get rid of it completely. But we also have Google Ads, and we want to continue to have Google Ads because they do make a difference in our revenue. But the problem is that to run Google Ads, it piggybacks on Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. So if we remove Google Analytics, then the ads cannot be measured. We use a consultant that does that. And so they're pushing back and saying, I can't run the ads properly if I don't have analytics. Do you have an answer?
I actually had to Google that,
Sorry
which
if
is
it's too
ironic.
specific, but I
Yeah,
figure
no, no,
if
no.
anyone knows, you
Uh,
might know.
yeah, no, I actually don't. I Well, and I guess the reason why we can't find the answer is that it's not doable. It's not possible to, and I think that is very intentional from Google's
and evil.
perspective. It's evil.
Yeah.
And I mean, unambitious. Why? I think again, I keep going back to ambition, and I know that doesn't motivate or trigger a response in everyone. But to me, being ambitious and really trying to set the bar at a place that I find interesting and valuable is something that at least motivates me. Yeah. And I think I would assume that it motivates people who want to create their own business, to be ambitious, right? To be different. And I think, so if it were me, what I would do is I would figure out how, I would remove Google Analytics once and for all. And then I would figure out, okay, how else do we then advertise? You can advertise in different browsers like DuckDuckGo, who doesn't track it. Advertising on its own is not the evil. We've had that since the beginning of time. But the evil that lies in the way that Google works is that they track to an extent that the human brain can't even comprehend. There is full disclosure on you as a type of person and me as a type of person, and how and they know exactly what type of product we are most likely to buy 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now. It's incredible. And it's something that my mind can't even my mind can't process the level of detail that they hold on someone like me, not me as a person, but someone that fits my profile.
Right.
Because I'm not, none of us are unique. So what I would do is I would find a different way to advertise. And DuckDuckGo is a good example. They also have advertising in their browser, and they're growing. So you can, it's a good place to advertise. And I also think Google Ads, the whole auction thing, and it's just become a very, very expensive marketing place. Even if it's effective, it's also become really, really expensive. Yeah. And they know that, and they don't really care. They just make more money.
Right.
So I would find platforms, browsers that don't use the type of tracking that Google does, that rely on quote unquote old-fashioned, demographic criteria and less on the behavioral criteria.
It seems like Google is under pressure to sort of do better, though. They're coming out with all these proposals for tracking in cohorts instead of individuals. What is your opinion about that? I mean, it's kind of hard to believe. The reputation is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is, and if it walks like a duck, right? I mean, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. Their business model is based on tracking individuals, and you can't change a company from outside in. And they're not ever going to change their core. So I'm not even going to try to speculate on how to improve Google's on an ethical scale, or Facebook for that matter. I think they're out of reach for that. I would much rather focus on using entirely different platforms. Matimo is, if you want to do tracking on your website, for instance, Matimo is a service or a SaaS product that you can basically download and install on your own service. So you can also do a cloud. They also have a cloud solution, but if you don't want that, you can basically store it on your own service, which makes it possible to contain. But that, I think that's a more interesting approach and an easier approach than hoping that Google will change so that you can look yourself in the mirror when you use their products.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is that this is kind of becoming the next frontier in competition. Apple, for instance, is pushing so hard to get this image as we're the company, we're the giant that cares about your privacy. That has to be proven, and reputation is a hard thing to gain and a quick thing to lose. But it's interesting to me that it's becoming more of the next frontier. I like that personally.
Yeah, I like that too. I just think that it clings hollow when Google and Facebook talks about ethics or responsibility.
Right.
It doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think as a product, as a company owner or a product owner, what I would do is I would look elsewhere instead of looking at the mastodons and hoping for them to change. Because and I know that's the difficult route to take. The easy route to take is to do what everyone else does. Like you said, well, we kind of had analytics from the beginning because everyone had that, and we figured we needed too. And then you realize you don't need it, but then you're woven into the suite, the Google suite, and you're kind of caught. So it takes a huge effort to create a solution that's not off the shelf. So they've really made the choice very easy to buy in and very hard to get out of. And that's also, that's in itself is actually also a dark pattern to make it very easy to get in and impossible to get out.
Well, listen, Trine, I would talk to you all day. These are my favorite topics, but I think that that's all the time we have for today. So thanks again, Trine, for being on the show.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me.